Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
As you know by now, we are watching Season 4. We have reached Episode 7, Yeon.
This is the Sun flash-forward / Jin flashback, although you don't know that at first, episode of Lost. Very different than the rest.
And we've also got the first part of a conversation with Kevin Durand, who of course played Martin Keamy.
It's a great conversation, but first let's get into the episode.
As always, we start each episode with a hot take on the episode we have just watched. Sammy, you mentioned that you have 2 hot takes this week.
I do. I'm full of the hot takes. I guess the first one I'll do is that all of this build-up about the captain of the boat, they've been building him up for a couple of episodes. He's so scary, he's intimidating, you don't want to get on his bad side. And he finally shows up here, and he's an interesting character. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's fascinating how he immediately is like, yeah, this is Widmore's boat, and how he shows them the black box and seems, very open. And I mean, he's interesting. And I know there's going to be some more intensity where he beats some guys up next week. But after all this build-up about what a badass he is, I'm kind of underwhelmed by the captain.
I agree with that. Especially the moment that set it off for me is when Michael passes the note through the door that says, "Don't trust the captain."
Yeah.
And he turns out, he doesn't seem like a dude that I'd want to get to know, but he turns out to just kind of be a guy who's here to do a job.
Yeah.
Not nearly as sinister as he's made out to be.
Really, of course, the big bad turns out to be Keamy. And the only justification I can think of for all the buildup of the captain is that maybe we're supposed to, it's supposed to make it all the more shocking or make Keamy all the more intimidating when he then up and, kills the captain a couple episodes down the line and really takes charge. But if that was the point, they still should have made the captain, much more of a, intimidating badass than they've actually made him here. Like, no disrespect intended to the actor playing Captain Galt, who I think is, just fine, but they put this character in an impossible position with all this build-up.
Yeah.
Bit disappointed. Rosie, what's your hot take?
Gosh. So, I'm a deep and devoted fan of Jin and Sun. I think the romance between them is beautiful. It's always very moving. They actually do things like forgive one another and talk about the past and come to terms with it. And then in this flash forward, we are led to believe that Jin is dead. And of course he is not. And, maybe there's some complexity around that. But the show basically makes us viewers experience Jin's death twice. Because we get a taste of it here where it's like, oh, you don't quite know at this point, like, is he still on the island or did he somehow die in the getting off of it? And then they die again in season 6 and it's heartbreaking. And I was very, very sad to sort of mourn Jin here and then realize, like, I'm going to have to do this all over again in 2 seasons.
Well, I'll one-up you. Not only do they make us experience Jin's death twice, they actually make us experience it 3 times. Because we assume that he's dead when the freighter explodes in the season 4 finale. And it's not until, I want to say at least 2 episodes and maybe more into season 5 that we find out that he actually survived.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
So they kill Jin 3 times on this show. And in fact, you could even make an argument when the raft blows up at the end of season 1. We get that whole episode adrift with Michael and Sawyer, and Jin is totally gone. I mean, Jin is, for all we know, also dead at that point. We don't know until he shows up at the end. So, I mean, Lost kind of makes you think Jin dies maybe even 4 times.
A lot.
Yeah.
And it's always upsetting because he's a wonderful character who, shows a great deal of compassion and growth, I think, throughout the show. And they just keep killing him. Or, you know, sort of using that, I guess. I guess they recognize that they sort of have their emotional hooks into us. And lots of people are invested in Jin, and therefore it'll be very moving. But a lot to like about this episode, but I was like, man...
Yeah, and I'm going to skip my other hot take because this just gets us right into the episode, and I don't want to sidetrack from Jin-san at this point. There is a lot to like about this episode. I do want to complain about one thing. I do not like And I kind of knew going in that I was going to react this way, my reaction was probably even worse this time than the first time I watched this episode. I don't love the whole Jin fake flash forward thing where it turns out to be a flashback. I think it's sort of a cheap device. But really my issue with it here is that it doesn't stand up to a second viewing well at all.
I agree.
Like, not knowing it's coming, I can understand how I and others would have, maybe not seen what was going on the first time, because Lost has never done anything like this before, have a combined flashback and flash forward. It's so out of left field.
Right. And it does trick you the first time.
Yeah, it does. Oh, definitely. I didn't know the first time. But watching it a second time, it feels so obvious. Like,
yeah.
So Sun is going into labor and, there's something wrong and they're worried about, what's going to happen to her. And Jin is all worked up about getting this panda. Like, he really has to get the panda.
Right. When the the moment of release in the show is when Jin admits, like, I was a bad dude. I'm not that guy anymore. And I think that's when that conversation that they have on the island, of course. And I think that is when, for me as a viewer, I was like, oh, of course. Like, this couldn't possibly be the Jin of the future because this is so very much the Jin of the past.
Which nominally I think is the point, that it's supposed to show us how Jin has changed. But watching it, I was just so, like, not compelled or interested in it, because you've already seen it, so it's coming, and two, you're watching, you're thinking, really, like, they really tricked me with this before. Like, he's such a jerk the whole time. It's clearly this pre-island, and he threatens to chop someone's head off or something, yelling after that taxi. And it's like, really, Sun is, you're not just rushing to the hospital to be with Sun, like, you need this fucking panda that badly.
Right.
It doesn't hold up. And I think it's redeemed somewhat by the beautiful scene with Hurley and Sun at the cemetery at the end that you mentioned. I mean, I was tearing up when when she says, I named her just like you wanted her to. It's beautiful. And the scene with Sun giving birth in the hospital, I mean, one, Yoon Jin Kim is fantastic in that scene, but two, seeing her call out for Jin and knowing that he's really not there, that scene definitely had more emotional weight, knowing that the other thing wasn't really part of the same storyline. But for most of this, for all of those Jin scenes, like, it really, kind of lost me. I was not that interested.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think I actually talked myself into liking this a little bit more.
Sorry.
in the telling of it, because I like thinking about that contrast that it creates between the man Jin was and, of course, the man Jin would have been if he had gotten off the island. As an illustration of that, it's effective. But, yeah, the tricksy bit of it, I think, doesn't hold up.
Yeah. And to the extent it might have worked the first time you watch it, maybe it definitely doesn't work on, second, third, fourth viewing.
Well, yeah, and now I'm kind of wondering, did it work the first time even? Because that couldn't be Jin, it's...
Right, they really depend on this being a format that's so, unprecedented that you just, can't bring... Sort of like the original Flash Forward, which worked so much better. I mean, that was such a killer twist, whereas this one, though, feels like a cheap trick to me.
Yeah.
I loved the rest of the episode. Don't get me wrong, like, seeing Jin and Sun, I mean, you were saying this, but how sweet they are together now, and... I mean, certainly the hindsight of knowing where it's going, the ultimate Jin-Sun storyline, like, gives everything, I think, an even more heightened than usual emotional intensity. I mean, similar to how I feel with, as I mentioned before, anytime Juliet talks about wanting to leave the island, which she does again this episode, by the way, telling Sun.
But you need to get off this island. We all do. You want to leave? More than anything. I don't know if that boat out there is the answer or not, but it's something. I need to go home. So do you.
Knowing what ultimately happens with Juliet and with Jin and with Sun, like, it just gives even more emotional heft to the stuff that's happening with them on island these last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because it's so sad.
Yeah.
By the way, with Juliet, the thing that she does where she tells Jin that Sun had an affair in order to derail Sun's move across the island to Locke's camp. Bold fucking move.
Whew, yeah, I was about to bring that up. The Sun-Juliet dynamic in this episode is fascinating because Sun clearly, has sort of chosen not to believe Juliet in terms of what will happen to her. Or she thinks, like, yeah, maybe this has happened in the past, but this isn't the most important concern that I have right now. I don't quite believe you when you say that this is what will happen to me in my second trimester and then I will die. Fair enough, I think. Like, Sun has good reason to continue to be suspicious of Juliet, even though, of course, she turns out to be right. And when Juliet reveals that to Jin...
Jin, your wife had an affair.
What?
Sun was with another man. She thought the baby was his.
The weight of it sort of drops, and it's like, oh, wow, Juliet is serious, serious about this.
Yeah.
Not in the least, because last week we learned about, a Juliet sort of affair of her own. I think she knows deeply how this will land and how serious it is to disclose this secret. And
that's such a good observation to tie that to Juliet last week.
But
totally.
The danger of it is so significant that Juliet says, like, nah, man, you're not going to Locke's camp.
Yeah, when Sun says at the end, Juliet was very convincing, I think, her speech was part of that, but I think you're probably right that Sun recognizes the fact that she did break confidence in that way. Like, she wasn't kidding around. I think that probably hit home with Sun as well.
No, and I think at this point, like, Juliet doesn't particularly care that Sun has had an affair, right? She did that because she knew the impact it would have on Jin and that it would force Sun to stay behind, and she was just dead serious that they needed to get off this island.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of hate her when she does it, but I feel like I don't blame her. Like, it was too important to let this one slide. Like, I think she had to do it.
Yeah, and I think her explanation at later in the episode is decent. As far as you are my patient, your baby is my patient. Like, the thing I need to be concerned about is your survival. And she gives this detailed timeline that's really horrific in terms of in 2 weeks you'll experience X, in 3 weeks you'll experience Y, and then you will die.
Right, and I think Juliet feeling like this baby is my patient is I mean, it's obviously informed by all of these past experiences she's had where she, was not able to save, 9 mothers, I think.
Right, I think that's
really
the number.
Horrific.
Yeah, and we saw last week what an impact that had on her. I mean, she was sort of brought to the island for this purpose, and I think she feels very deeply like, not only have I failed at my job, but I've let these women die. My job was to save them, and I didn't save them. Not unlike kind of the approach that Jack takes to some things, right? Like, my job was to save these people, and I didn't save them. Different.
Jack and Juliet would have made a good couple. I know we brought this up last week, but
it makes sense. I'm here with you on Juliet and Sawyer, but
yeah,
it makes sense.
Yeah, they have a lot in common.
Yeah. I do want to say, when Jin goes out on the fishing boat with Bernard, and Bernard gives that lovely little ditty about karma.
You make bad choices, bad things happen to you. Or you make good choices, and then good... Hey, you got one. Yeah, here, pull it in. Wow, look at that. Now, you see? Now that's karma. We must be the good guys, huh?
I really enjoyed Bernard's. I mean, it's nice that it's his lesson ended up being a lesson for Jin, that you've got to do the right thing and it'll come back to you, and it there's karma, and it convinces Jin that he's got to just move on and forgive Sun for this, and which is lovely. But I really liked his explanation for why it was that they didn't go with Locke. I mean, we sort of got this from Rose earlier in the season, where she made some comment like, Locke's insane, Locke's a crazy person, I'm not going with him, which, but just to hear Bernard, sort of explore that a little more here, and to make the point that it was the right thing to do. Locke is a murderer. Yeah. This is the right thing to do, is to go with Jack, because Jack is the good guy. And I just felt like, wow, in a show that everything is always being presented in shades of gray, to like hear that kind of moral clarity from a character that you like and respect as much as Bernard. Like, this was just the right thing to do. I don't know, I felt it was extra powerful in the context of Lost, where it's so infrequent for someone who's just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point. And I think Bernard often is kind of, you know, there are not that many characters who we get to know well who are not sort of, you know, candidates, who are not sort of that main cast involved in the drama of the day-to-day. And Bernard is one of them. And he serves as this nice voice of reason.
Yeah.
That sort of explains, like, what all of the other survivors are thinking. And this is very, like you said, this is very plain. It's very clear. It's, we don't trust Locke. We think he's a bad dude. We think he's a murderer. Jack is not. So for all of our arguments about, like, who is the better leader, who understands the island, who's actually capable of what, that doesn't matter that much for Bernard,
oh, God,
right?
You're right. Yeah.
All he wants to follow somebody who is good. And
right, and this is, I mean, and that's ultimately where the Rose and Bernard storyline goes. I mean, I think Rose says something to that effect in season 6 when they're just living on the island. They're just trying to live their lives and do well by each other and for themselves and avoid all of the, you know, the battles, Jack and Locke and Jacob and the Man in Black. Like, they just so don't want to be a part of that. And even here, I mean, it's like, yes, they chose to go with Jack, but not because they're trying to get off the island or they think Jack is right. I mean, they want to stay on the island, but they're doing their own thing. They're really, my mom loves to use the expression marching to the beat of his or her own drummer. And that's what they're doing. They're marching to the beat of their own drummer.
very nice.
Yeah.
They very much are.
Do you have anything you want to talk about on the freighter? We've mostly been on island and in the flashbacks / forwards.
Yeah, a few things. The freighter, the presentation of the freighter in this episode is just, it's just disturbing. Between all of the build up to the captain, don't trust the captain, between sort of the creepy doctor, the woman who climbs up to the top deck wrapped in a chain and throws herself off and nobody cares.
Yeah, Regina.
And of course then the revelation that the plane crash was faked, which, Lapidus alluded to in Confirmed Dead, but we haven't revisited that, have we?
No, we saw in Lapidus' flashback, we saw the video of the plane that was found under the ocean.
Right.
But no, in terms of...
This is the first time we've returned to that. But it's
right.
This very unsettling series of events that just make you think, like, okay, definitely these people are not here for a good reason.
Yeah.
I was left with a feeling of, like, let's get off this freighter as soon as possible.
The freighter is weird, right?
It's weird. The energy is very weird.
Exactly. That's it. The energy is weird. Every scene, it feels like there's something that feels off in every moment on that boat, where it's like, you know that something is not how it's supposed to be and something is weird, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is that's really happening here. Like, all of the, the build up about the captain, and you mentioned this. Regina jumping overboard is definitely a strong moment, but even just like walking around the halls of that boat, like this episode, we had the scene where Saeed and Desmond, there was that banging noise in the background, and they talked about it, but they didn't know what it was. And then there's a great little moment with Lapidus. I love every scene that Lapidus is in, by the way, but there's that great moment where... Oh, no, sorry, this was Ray, not Lapidus, where Desmond says, when this ship isn't moving, and Ray's like, well, if you say so. Right. Like, yeah, not to mention the guy, everyone getting the sickness. So? Yeah, like, nobody knows what's going on. We don't know what's going on. I should also note here, we have a conversation coming up with a guy named Jim Newport, who was the production designer for Season 4 and actually was involved in designing the interior sets for the freighter. So one, he had to, go and find a boat, which is another thing for the exterior stuff, but then for the interior stuff, like, they did it on set, and he, had a team, and they designed it, and, was talking about, like, the sculptor that they had, and making the wheels to turn the doors, and, like, they do such a good job of making it look so creepy in there. Like, it looks like some, rundown dungeon on the inside of this ship.
Yeah.
Everything. It almost looks like it's just like dripping with like muck and dirt and whatever, like
and the thing,
slime.
I read a
almost.
book last year, a fabulous book called The Outlaw Ocean, which is all about sort of weird stuff that happens at sea, and some of it was about sort of, illegal fishing, these fishing boats that are sort of operating in international waters and hire crews and pay them under the table and things like that, and that's very much the vibe I get from this boat. And it's kind of like Charles Widmore basically has an unlimited budget. Why isn't he sending
Excellent question.
Excellent
question.
It's a weird layer in this onion of Charles Widmore that we're peeling back. You have this sort of hyper advanced sci-fi science team who are exploring questions about time and space, and then you have Widmore, who we've already met, who's this very buttoned up posh Londoner with seemingly unlimited resources, and then in the middle you have this very weird freighter. I don't know, it's strange. It makes the whole thing seem much, much seedier.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. Maybe he spent all his money on the Tovard Hanso journal in that auction scene back in the Constant. Ran out of money after that.
Or staging the plane crash, which is horrific.
Or staging the plane crash.
How scary is it when the captain says, where do you think you get all those bodies?
Well, Ben presents evidence on that next week, or Tom does, to Michael. They dug up a cemetery somewhere.
In Thailand, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
Which is horrifying.
Yeah.
It's horrifying. But, yeah, I don't know. This is definitely a grim dimension here.
That's one way to put it. One other quick boat comment. I had never noticed this before, and I was very proud of myself for catching it, although then I discovered that, of course, it's noted on Lostpedia. You can actually see Michael in that scene where Regina throws herself off the side of the boat.
Yeah.
It's really quick. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Where he shows up in that hoodie between those two other crew members who are looking over the edge, and it's like this split-second shot, and it's like when Michael's on the boat, it stands out. Oh, fuck, that's Michael. But I had not noticed that on previous viewings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, 24-26 if you want to go check that out.
Oh, jeez.
Oh boy.
Anyway.
Do you have any hindsights?
This isn't so much a hindsight as just a moment of clarity, but we have met the entire Oceanic Six now, right? Sun, Hurley, Jack, Kate, Aaron,
Saeed.
Yeah. So we know. And I remember watching this for the first time and realizing that. And that's when I was like, oh shit, Jin didn't get off the island. Assuming they counted Aaron, which, why wouldn't they?
But that's interesting, though, because at the beginning of this episode, or right up until the end, when you theoretically don't know that Jin's in flashback and not flash forward, I think probably the proper read on that is that Aaron wasn't counted, because Aaron hadn't been born. Right, and Sun and Jin are
the final two.
Right, because Aaron, I remember being confused by that at the time, because should Aaron count? He wasn't born at the time of the crash. So is he one of the
He wasn't,
Oceanic
on
Six
the manifest, yeah.
Right, exactly. So in theory, I guess that was what you were supposed to think here, probably. That Jin was number 6.
Yeah. Knowing this. Yeah.
I think that, that's related to my hindsight, and I think that part of what's interesting about that is that we, even though now, okay, there's no one else who's officially a survivor of Oceanic 815 who got off of this
Sawyer
island.
doesn't make it off. John Locke, Claire.
Well, but that's the thing. I think that the show, if you really think about it, leaves open for interpretation the question of what, is there anyone else off? Because we know that Ben is off the island. We learned that in The Economist. And we know that, I guess we don't know yet that Desmond is off the island. That hasn't been revealed. But knowing that Ben, it's he wasn't on Oceanic 815, but he did get off the island clearly somehow, some way. Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of speaks to just puts the idea in your head that maybe there are other characters that we know from the island who are out there in the world now. And, for instance, in the flash forwards, the first flash forward and Through the Looking Glass, you had, the mysterious guy in the coffin. or person in the coffin. We still don't know who the person in the coffin is. Of course, it turns out to be Locke. So I just think that it leaves open to interpretation, at least the idea, gee, what if someone else did get off the island and, they're hiding, or for some reason they don't want to be known. I think it
in
also,
some kind of weird, unsanctioned other way.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Which is what happened with Ben, as we see he shows up in the Saharan desert, and how did he get there? And I think with Jin in particular, like, you do get the cemetery scene, and Sun's actions in the scene and her words strongly suggest that he's dead, or that she, as we know later, she thinks he's dead. Mm-hmm. But, you see on his tombstone that it lists September 22nd, 2004 as the day of death. So, obviously they're pretending that he died in the crash, which he didn't. But I think that also just sort of puts in your mind the idea of who is dead and who is still alive on the island. Like, they definitely have not suggested that everyone they left behind is dead. Like, there's been...
No, and they've been pretty explicit about the fact that they're not.
Right. But I think that just, leaves open the possibility for Jin. It's open in both directions. Like, who's alive on the island? Who's dead on the island? Mm-hmm. Who else might have secretly made it off? I feel like these things are all still open for questioning at this point.
Well, but then the wild card we get thrown in this episode is Michael, of course, who we don't actually know that Michael ever got off the island. We know that
that's interesting.
Followed a bearing, and, he took Walt, but now he is here, some short distance offshore. And I don't think we know that he... So that is just something that's been thrown into the mix of, like, oh, shoot, this guy's been gone for 2 years, but... Or in Showtime, 6 weeks or whatever, but...
Less. In fact, the timeline is kind of fucked up. He was gone for such a short period of time that if you really dig into it, it's like, how on earth did all of the things in Meet Kevin Johnson have time to happen and for him to... Which is fine. We'll let that slide.
Yeah.
But no, I actually... I mean, that's resolved quickly, because next week we learn that he did, in fact, make it home.
Right.
But I never even thought about that this episode leaves open the possibility that, like, maybe that bearing Ben gave him was a bearing to get captured by Widmore's boat or some shit.
Or just it was false and he got kind of caught in the snow globe and...
Right.
Ended up here. People end up places. But I think it left me with this sense of, like, okay, so these are the Oceanic Six. Yeah, a lot of questions about everyone else.
Right. I feel like that adds to what I was saying, for sure. Like, oh yeah, if Michael actually was off, potentially off the island as well, like, did the world know that? Like, why wouldn't he be counted as one of the Oceanic Six? It speaks to the idea that perhaps there are others out there that aren't, known in some way.
Yeah.
And we really don't, find out for sure until the end of the season when we see what actually happens.
Right. Anyway.
But for now, Kevin Durand has stuff to say.
Yeah, so this week, I'm not on this interview. It took place, I'm in the Eastern time zone. It took place a little too late at night for me after Kevin's kids had gone to bed. But Kevin and Sammy connected and had a wonderful conversation about how he approached the character of Martin Keamy, how he made him human, and many, many funny stories from the set, as usual.
So tell us, let's start at the beginning. How'd you get cast? How'd you get the role?
Wow. I got a call out of nowhere saying that Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof wanted me to read for this part, and they sent me this one-page thing. I looked at it. I went in. I didn't put a whole lot on it because I hadn't watched the show. I heard about it. I knew that it was a big show, but I hadn't watched it at that point. I knew that it was incredibly successful, but I didn't. I had a feeling with this character that off of the one sheet that they gave me that he was not. It's not like he was going to join this narrative and become buddies with everybody. I was like, I think it's better if I don't know anyone. So I didn't watch any of the show.
Interesting.
I went in and I had a very strong idea just off of that page of what it was, and then later on after I got it and I'm sitting there in Hawaii and they told me that they had seen 3:10 to Yuma, and they liked that guy that Russell Crowe stabbed in the neck 100 times.
Which was you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was just happy to be there, and I really thought I was only going for an episode. I thought, wow, I've never been to Hawaii, and got out there and just had a ball.
Wow. So you had no idea that you didn't know you were going to recur. You just thought it was a 1-episode gig.
No idea. I got at the same time I got the Blob. I got Fred Dukes in X-Men, and so I was living between Sydney, Australia, and Honolulu. It was amazing. It was like a big chapter of surfing for me. In my life, it was just like a really, really good time. I was surfing like whenever I wasn't on set. It was just awesome.
That's awesome. Some of the crew has told us that too. I think we were talking with the cinematographer, Michael Beauvalon. He was telling us how just every break they would get, they would go out and surf. And I mean, it sounds like a great, unlike any other kind of job you could have.
Never seen anything like it. Yeah, it's phenomenal. There were some real surfers in that crew too, like guys who were big wave surfers, like stuff that I mean. I'm such an amateur, but they were the real deal. So it was fun to be around that energy. It was just, it was a really, really nice chapter.
Do you remember
work with those folks?
When you got cast? Do you remember either what was on that page or sort of what your idea was about who the character was that you brought to that? Just what the thinking was.
The page that I read specifically, I don't even remember exactly what the scene was. It's just I felt like I had a sense of who he was to a certain degree, enough to get me by with the audition. But it was one of those characters that, because of how secretive they were with the narrative and what was happening next, everybody was waiting for the next script, kind of, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Like we never had any idea. And I remember being on the plane coming from Sydney, and they wouldn't give you the script till the last minute, And I convinced them to give me this script before I got on the plane from Sydney, Hawaii. So I was shooting the next day. I was like, come on,
right.
Please.
For sure.
And it was the scene where, where I killed Alex, and it was, I just remember having this visceral, really intense reaction, reading it, going, oh, this might be the most impactful scene I've ever been a part of, and I kind of had a feeling if I did it right, that it was going to help me along in Hollywood, because it was just so incredibly well written. I was like, my God, I can't wait to say this shit. And, and I remember the next day getting on the bus and in the van and going to work and just feeling so charged, and oh man, I only met her once. I only met her that day. The wonderful actress that played.
Yeah,
her,
Tanya Raymond.
Thank you, Tanya Raymond. I said, "Hi, how you doing? I'm Kevin. I'm going to be killing you today." And she just looked at me, and she looked pretty distraught about it, and I was like, God, I'm such an asshole. Which I was trying to be funny. Doesn't always work. But anyways, that definitely dropped a bit of a wedge between us on that day.
Interesting.
It was great because I was like, I don't. You as far as Martin Keamy was concerned, it's like, well, he had he had shit to do, and he didn't really care much about the person that he was doing it to. He was just trying to get through to Mr. Emerson, right?
Yeah, so you're saying that you established that animosity right there with Tanya going in.
pretty easy. I don't think she dug my sense of humor at the time. Then at the end of the day, we hugged. Everything was good. But going in, it was just,
it's funny.
pretty great. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that was it. It's kind of like cool for me as a fan to know that was your reaction reading the script as an actor, that you had that level of excitement around it. Because watching that scene, I mean, it's I watched it this morning. It's a brutal scene to watch, but it's incredible. Like, it's spellbinding. Like, I could watch that scene again and again and watch you and Michael Emerson face off, because it's just it's magnetic. It's wonderful, even though it's awful.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, the as an artist, you always hope that you can do something that will generate reaction, generate human emotion, no matter what that may be. I never got into. My dream was to be an actor. I never thought, I just want to make people laugh all the time, or I just, I genuinely wanted to just make people feel things across the entire spectrum of emotion, and it's cool. I mean, that was it was such an impactful piece, and that character was just such a gift, such a gift.
So before we talk in more detail about that scene, which I want to do, you say Keamy was a gift. Who in your mind was Keamy? What kind of person was he? And I ask that just because I know it seems on the one hand very straightforward. He was a mercenary. He was getting paid. He was there to do a job. But and maybe this is in the way you portray the character. But every time I watch him, I think that he's got some lines that are sort of funny, and he's he seems like he's really into it in a way that it's more than just like this is a job where he's getting paid. Like there's something that's just a little bit more to him than just he's a thug who's there to do a job. And I'm curious, how you would describe who he was and why you thought he was such a great character.
I had an internal thing going on, an internal dialogue that like a history, a background that I created just for myself because I had to, because a lot of this stuff was so mysterious. So you had to kind of come up with, okay, well, who the hell is he? I don't know. So I came up with my own concept. My concept was that, Widmore had threatened me and said that if I didn't eradicate everyone on that island and bring back, Ben, within a certain amount of time, that he would kill my entire family. That's how I had played. So it gave him a sense of expediency. Like he needed to get things done quickly. He didn't have time to weigh things out ethically or morally. It was just them or mine. So I don't know that he enjoyed it or savored it, but I mean, he had been doing this as a job for quite a while as a mercenary, and he had seen and done so many things that had numbed him out, and it just felt like he just needed to get this done as quick as possible, so that he could save as many people from his family as he could, people that meant something to him in his own world. So so people would say, "Oh my God, you're like the most evil guy in the world." But I think when it comes to any of us, not any of us, but a lot of us, anyways, when it comes to like, okay, you're gonna save your family, or you're gonna kill theirs. It's like it's human nature, right?
For
so
sure.
It's when faced with that choice, what do you pick? For him, it was pretty clear. He wanted to get it done as fast as he could. So a lot of times it seemed like, why is he in such a rush? That's why. To me, that's why I was rushing through it. Yeah.
And I was rewatching your scenes, and part of what strikes me is just the lengths that he's willing to go to get this done. Like in the finale of season 4, you get stabbed through the side and shot in your vest a bunch of times, and after that you get back up with blood dripping down your legs and go back down there, to try to still take on Ben. I'm thinking, what is this guy doing? Like, just give up, move on. Like, no.
Yeah, no choice. No choice. There's, I don't know if I ever told Carlton about that was my thinking. Because then we went on and did another series together, and after Lost, and I'm not sure if we ever discussed that. We were always kind of talking about the next job. I was always so grateful for him for giving me that opportunity. But that's where I was coming from with that.
What was it like to work with Michael Emerson? Because you guys have a pretty fun dynamic.
I just love working with terrific actors, and he's like, he's just so bloody good and so intense and so interesting and committed. And when you get to play with people who are throwing that amount of fire at you, then you feel like you could throw even more fire at them. So it's terrific. It's terrific. I didn't really talk to him very much between scenes. I mean, we were both these kind of like, in real life, kind of like these soft-spoken, kind of almost more like shy fellows.
Yeah. We've talked.
Not.
We've talked to him actually twice for the podcast, and you're right. He's exactly like that. It's so different than Ben.
Sweet man.
Yeah.
He's just a really sweet man, and just a monster of an actor, And I was so excited to square off with him. I hope I get to do it again someday. It's terrific.
Yeah. What do you remember actually filming that sequence? I mean, the sequence with Alex. Was he there? Was he really there in the window? Were you looking at him? Were you guys talking on a walkie? Yeah.
Oh yeah, he was there. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's there are actors that, and these are the ones that I'm most grateful for to work with. The ones that will, whether they're on camera or they're off camera for you, they're always going to give you the same amount of commitment. And he was definitely one of those. I remember just seeing those eyes just staring at me through the window. Just he's even from a distance, I felt it. He's terrific.
Yeah, no, he is, and I mean credit to you in this scene as well. I mean, I'm watching the scene. You got him in the window and you standing there with the gun, and I mean there were a couple things that struck me, of which I'm sure some were in the script and some was just you. I mean, you pulled the trigger well before zero. I mean, once you determine that he's not changing his mind, like you're not waiting till zero. You give Alex the phone to say goodbye, which is especially cruel in some ways. It's a very hard moment to watch. Like, I don't know. I mean, there are moments when I'm looking at your face in that scene and I'm thinking, oh, like he looks like he's almost a little disturbed, like he feels bad about this. And then there are moments where you look like you were really enjoying it, like twisting the knife into Ben. Like, just tell me about your process there and what you were trying to do.
I don't think he enjoys killing.
Yeah.
I don't think I never felt that he was a psychopath.
Okay.
I felt that he was more of a guy doing a job.
Yeah.
And I think he was pretty sure that when he'd be standing there staring at Alex's father, that he wouldn't allow this to happen. I think
he would come out of the house. Yeah.
I think it was frustrating. It's like, okay, well, you think this means it doesn't really mean anything to me. So if this is what I need to do, I have no problem doing it. So here you go. Live with this. I'm going to be able to sleep tonight as long as I get as long as I achieve what I need to achieve today.
Right.
That's the way he's thinking. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Did you have to do a lot of takes on that scene, or was it pretty straightforward? Do you have any recollection of that?
I don't think it. I think it was one of those scenes where we showed up and it was just fire. Sometimes there's just an alchemy between the players and the words. It was all there. It always felt like it was there. The only scene that I felt that it wasn't there was the first time on the freighter, and I really thought I knew who he was, and I get seasick. I'm on this damn freighter, and it's just going. So they give me some anti-nausea medication, and I'm extremely sensitive to anything and everything that I put in my body. Like I could take an aspirin and I feel it in my body. So I take this thing and I felt like I couldn't remember the words. I felt like they were going to fire me. And I just thought it was just the worst acting I'd ever done. And I really thought I was going to get fired that day.
Just on those first couple scenes, the first time when you're on the boat.
Yeah.
Wow.
I really thought that I was going to get fired. And Jeff Fahey, goes, what's going on? I said, I don't know. I'm fucking killing. Like I'm killing this in a bad way. Like I'm not. And he was like, what? What are you talking about? And he pulls me aside. He's like, I'm watching every take. He's like, I'm going to tell you about 2 things that you need to watch tonight, and this is what you're doing. And I go, okay. He goes, Christopher Walken, Dogs of War, and he goes, Marlon Brando on the Waterfront. Go watch those. That's what you're doing today. And I was like, what? And I went and watched them, and I honestly, him just saying that to me, then all of a sudden, I don't know, I just kind of took a deep breath, and I just felt like, yeah, okay, I'm owning this. And then I went home, I watched those movies, and I was like, oh, wow. And then from then on, I just felt like there was a fire lit under my ass. And
That's awesome.
Because as any artist, as a journalist, right? Like you do stuff and you're like, am I nailing this? Or what is this? It's just when you're there on the day, you don't have time to work anymore. It's like it's so all these people are fucking depending on me to do something, and that was my only moment on that show, where I was questioning it. And I usually don't question myself at all. I think in like 30 years of doing this. But that moment, I remember being really scared. I was like, I had never played characters that drove the action the way that Keamy does. And,
Interesting.
I was always more reactive up to that point. So all of a sudden, they give me this character who's driving every
Right. He owns every
moment
scene
that
he's in. He's in charge.
He owns every single moment, and that was new for me. And then as soon as I switched gears and I savored it, I just loved it, loved every second. Yeah.
That's awesome. And by the way, just for our listeners who may not know, Jeff Fahey, who you're referencing, that's the actor who plays Frank Lapidus, the pilot there on the boat.
Yeah.
And that's cool that he was there to, give you that kind of confidence. I mean, I guess he's probably been around doing this for a while and knows his shit.
Jeff is an amazing human being, and I really admire him, look up to him, and to have him say that, I mean, not just on that show, it just made me feel, there are people in your lifetime that just kind of give you a pat on the back, and it means so much more than they could ever realize,
Have you worked with him on other stuff, or just on that show?
No, just on that.
Yeah.
We became good pals, and then in this business, you go job to job, to job to job, and everybody goes separate ways. But just amazing.
So by the way, I was going to ask about being on the boat. So clearly, you were really on a freighter out there in the water off of Hawaii.
Oh,
yeah. You had to do a bunch of work out there. They sent you back a couple times, right?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, it was the first time that I felt really kind of seasick, and then after that I was fine.
Good.
It was probably also nerves. First day on a job that's already like a big hit. You're like coming in going, how the hell do I? Anyways.
Yeah, no, I mean that's something that I've asked a couple of folks over the couple of years we've been doing this, like just being dropped into this pop culture phenomenon, like has got to be kind of crazy. I mean, and all the mysteries and the mythology. I mean, did you ever go back and watch it?
I was super fortunate that I didn't immerse myself in it too much because it might have made me nervous to know how much of an impact it was having.
Interesting.
So I could just go in and just do my job, and then since then, it started having babies. I haven't watched. It's the craziest thing because I went and did the Strain with Carlton a couple of years later, and I don't think we ever talked about it, but I've never had a chance to watch the entire thing, which is going to be really cool when I get to one day once the kids are old.
I'll tell you, it's a good TV show.
So I've heard.
Yeah.
So I've heard. No. Like I mean, what I've seen is amazing, but I also understand that it's like. You have to drop in from the beginning and go all the way through to really get
it's true.
A true sense. It's not one of those. Usually networks have shows that you can watch these standalone episodes from first to seventh season. It doesn't matter. Not usually, but a lot of the times. This show is not like that.
the one episode, and just to skip ahead here, and then I'm going to go back and ask you some more about the episodes you did, but some people have seen the end, even if they haven't seen anything else. Did you watch the finale?
I did watch the finale. Yeah. But I kind of wish I hadn't because you have to watch everything leading up to it. So I know a lot of people were mad and people thought it was genius. It was just kind of all over the map. It's like kind of the same way people felt about the ending to The Sopranos.
Yeah, for sure.
I really appreciated Kevin's approach here to Keamy as somebody who's not a monster, right? Like. He's must have some motivation, and I really like what he said about what if Keamy has a daughter, and he's sort of thinking about this confrontation with Ben as far as, this is what I would do for my daughter. This isn't what you would do for yours. That was like very humanizing, and I'm excited to watch that scene with that in mind, because to me, Keamy always just seemed like kind of a soulless mercenary. And I never thought about him more deeply.
I agree with you, and I thought that he says at one point in our conversation, he says, I don't think he was a psychopath, which is interesting because I kind of had thought of him as a psychopath. But, watching those scenes and thinking about those scenes in the context of, him, the motivation that he was describing for the character, I think I see it a little differently. Like, there are moments where he seems, like sadistic, I think. Mm-hmm. Moments where it seems like he's... on the sort of enjoying going after Ben and enjoying the cat and mouse. Like I think about the scene where he's, dripping blood down in the Orchid Station and, trying to draw Ben out. And there's just this quality, and I don't want to misquote the scene right now without having just watched it, but there's this quality about him where, it seems like he really, I'm repeating myself, he enjoys it. There's a quality where it seems like he's kind of enjoying himself. And I think that what I'm really seeing now that Kevin has explained how he was trying to do this is that he must have just been so inured to this kind of violence after however many years of doing this mercenary work. Like, to an extent, I think that does make you soulless because you kind of have to be. Like, when you're doing the kinds of things that Keamy, his job requires him to do, I think that his explanation of why he would do this stuff makes all the sense in the world and is wonderfully humanizing for the character. Right. But I don't think you can do that stuff without an element of you that's, muted whatever sensitivity you might feel
Right.
to doing these terrible things and replaced it with a little bit of excitement at the chase.
Yeah, I think what you're saying now really echoes our recent conversations about Saeed in The Economist, right? It's this character who we love because we know we have encountered so many layers to this character, and we know he has these complex motivations, and we see him doing these things that are horrific, and we think, how did you get from point A to point B? And with Keamy, all we see is point B. And I think what Kevin brings to it is that there was a point A, and, take a moment to imagine.
And I'm so glad you made the Saeed comparison, because I remember we discussed this. I was kind of alarmed and jarred and a bit confused by that moment where Saeed walks away from his first encounter with the woman who he's conning, whose name unfortunately I don't remember, but where he's walking down the street after having conned her, and this little, hint of a smile pops up at the corner of his face. And I remember, we talked like, why is Saeed enjoying this? But it's like, to be that person, I think you kind of have to be that person in a way. Yeah. And Keamy is, so much more far gone than Saeed ever was at that point. That even though there's this human element to him, I think there also has to be that sadist element, or he couldn't actually do this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I loved hearing his explanation as well, because it all kind of it fits together really nicely with who you see on screen.
I agree.
I also thought it was interesting that so many actors that we've talked to, I feel like, have said they really didn't want to know more than was on the page and just wanted to play what was on the page, and he had just totally opposite approach of needing to have a backstory that explained to him why this guy was this way. So I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. Well, next week we will be watching Season 4, Episode 8, Meet Kevin Johnson, where, of course, we're going to spend a little bit more time with Michael and figure out where he's been when he did, in fact, get off the island.
And we'll have the first part of a conversation, which I mentioned earlier, with Jim Newport, who is the production designer for the pre-writer's strike portions of Season 4. So for those first 8 episodes, and he'll talk about designing the freighter and working on the Constant. He had a lot to say about the Constant. It's another wonderful conversation.
Yeah, we'll come back to Kevin Durand a little bit later. In the meantime, we love talking with you, hearing your comments throughout the week. We are on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, and you can find us at facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast.
If you're enjoying The Hatch, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, if you don't mind, or Stitcher, or Spotify, or wherever you listen to us. And if you want to leave a review too, we wouldn't mind.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we'll be back next week.
Namaste.